On that note, let's bring in, because a good friend of yours and to the show, as a human rights lawyer, her job is to expose, and we're going to do the police report in a second of Voice in the Head, because I've got something for you later on. I want to play to you and get your opinion about. But as a human rights lawyer, the role of any human rights lawyer is to expose the hypocrisy of laws and policies being put down. And when you expose it and you show it for what it really is, you can become a target as well. And I'll be quite interested to know if this happened to our next guest. So do you want to introduce our next guest?
Yes, we've had her before, but I'd like to introduce to the show Jacqueline McKenzie, human rights lawyer. But when we see Jacqueline McKenzie, a lot of people think Windrush, because Jackie has managed many, many cases, and she's very well known for the work that she's done. And it's something that we want to, on this particular show, we want to keep people abreast. It's one of our topics that we will never ever let go. So having somebody like Jackie, who is at the forefront of what's going on, is fantastic news to say. Hello, Jackie, welcome to the show today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. We'll always appreciate when you come on, because we know we're getting a real update of where things are at. So we really always appreciate that. Something just happened. Is it something you can share? That thing you said to me on the phone? Or not?
Well, not in too much detail, but it's just, as you know, the government has announced that they'll be rounding up people for Rwanda today. And we have one person who's very much at risk and has actually suffered suicidal ideation. And a befriender who works with him called us and said, you know, he's really worried. So we were just putting all the things into place.
Right. Okay.
To protect him. He's also got to report to the Home Office today. And of course, as lawyers, we can't tell people not to go because we'd be breaking the law. We leave it up to our clients to decide, but that became an additional complication because he wanted us to say what he should do, but we just can't. But it's a grim day. It's a grim day for human rights. It's a grim day for humanity for many reasons. I don't know if you're touching on Rwanda today. There's a lot I can say about it. But but we were just managing a situation.
Okay. Can I just ask just one quick question? Are there many Caribbean people who are listed to go to Rwanda?
No, well, we haven't seen any lists, so we don't know.
That's true.
But if so, under the Illegal Migration Act, you're deemed inadmissible if you've come into the UK without the authority to do so, so without a visa, effectively. Right. Because interestingly, asylum seekers and people wanting to become refugees can actually enter into a country illegally. If you're fleeing for your persecution, you haven't really got time to go and sort out paperwork or get a passport. You just flee. And the Refugee Convention caters for that. So it's all very confused. However, illegal migration is this term that the government's coined for people effectively coming across the channel. And you're not seeing many black. I don't think I've ever come across a Caribbean person coming across the channel. It is mainly people from the Horn of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And of course, there were Albanians from Europe. Okay. Caught up in this too. Most people traveling to the UK from the Caribbean don't require visas. So when they land, they may not be landed, so they may not be given access to the UK, because when you're on airside of the airport, you're not quite landed yet. You've not entered the country. And some of them get refused at that point. But generally speaking, if you're from the Caribbean and you've come for a holiday, you don't need a visa, so you're never going to be deemed illegal. And the only people, ironically, and this is something that is a subject of a separate discussion, is the discrimination that's meted out to poor old Jamaicans. I'm half Jamaican myself. I've never fully understood how the Jamaican government and the Jamaican people allow that situation to continue.
Okay. Quincy.
Hello, Jackie. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
I spoke to a mutual friend yesterday. He speaks very highly of you, Mr. Lester. Very highly of you.
Lester.
Eddie.
Oh, Eddie Minister, of course, yes.
Yeah, he spoke very highly of you. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. He accused me of espousing propaganda on his program.
No, he was just basically saying that when you both talk, even on his program or talk in general, the patois between both of your neighbouring countries comes out in force.
Yes.
There's nothing, as we all three of us speaking now, we'll be amongst our own. It was a couple of and
No, Eddie and I, we're usually dealing with really serious issues. I mean, this week we dealt with Rwanda. Normally we're dealing with immigration, or Windrush rather, but sometimes more general immigration, human rights issues. But somehow we managed to find some humor in these very dark moments.
That's good.
Well, no, that's what we do, and that's what Eddie does. Yeah. So look, I just want to ask you, the situation now, we are seeing it shift. So Ireland have come into the conversation.
Yes.
So a lot of boats are going across to Ireland now, and the Irish government, the Northern Ireland government, are saying, well, they're going about their way to ship them back to the UK. So what is the situation now with Ireland being involved in the mix, who are currently dealing with their own immigration issue?
Yeah. Well, I mean, these countries, like the UK, like Southern Ireland Air, ought to just really do their bit for humanity. There are 120 million people displaced around the world. That's the first thing to note. You've got a country like Trinidad and Tobago that only has a population of just over 1 million and has taken almost 200,000 people from Venezuela because of the US embargo and sanctions has meant things in Venezuela are very tough and people are fleeing. Poland, which is nowhere near as wealthy as Britain or possibly even Ireland, has taken in 2 million people from Ukraine. So when you hear countries like Britain saying they can't cope with 30,000 people coming across the channel, or Ireland saying, well, our numbers have gone up, you know, it is just really a red herring in this whole debate, because these are wealthy countries that ought to do their bits for humanity and ought to be part of the global crisis that there is with this large numbers of people having to flee persecution, mainly because of the intransigence of the West in many cases. So that's the first thing to say about Ireland, that they ought to just be quiet and accept people. However, there is an increase in the numbers there. Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, you know, was beside himself to say that you see the deterrent. So there is a deterrent because people are going to Ireland. Well, people were going to Ireland. Ireland's numbers were increasing before Rwanda was ever mentioned. Rwanda was mentioned April 22, and their numbers were increasing for all manner of reasons. It might just be that there are more opportunities there, or people have family ties and strong cultural ties there, because you are allowed to move and choose your country of asylum if you've got reason to do so. So those numbers were going up. It is true that we have seen an increase in those numbers in recent weeks, an additional increase in recent weeks. There is bound to be a short, we don't know if there's a correlation, as we don't know who these people are or why they're going, why they've chosen Ireland. They may have, as I said, family members there. So the correlation that the Prime Minister is drawing is false, however, or likely to be false. However, there is likely to be some people who are thinking, oh, we want to be somewhere else rather than the UK at the moment. And so there may well be a very tiny detriment. But if we've got time, I'll come back and tell you why. It is only a very tiny detriment. Now, of course, Ireland, and we're talking about Southern Ireland, the country of Air, is still in the EU. So they still have the Dublin measures available to them. So they can return people to a safe third country. But ironically, they have actually said, or one of their judges has said, we don't consider the UK to be a safe third country because people are at risk of Rwanda. How ironic is that?
That is really ironic. That really is. Hear that, Quincy? Yeah, that is freaky. Okay. So, right, Jackie, we were talking, Quincy and I've had this conversation over the weekend about what is a journalist. Yeah. And I don't know what you're able to share, but you've been targeted You've been targeted from so many directions for the great work that you do. I'm not sure what can you share in terms of your experiences and what to you is journalism, because you've been affected by it. I mean, but it's not for me to say.
I'm sorry. So, Jack, I was just going to say this. I know you're not a journalist. Your role as a human rights lawyer, you expose lies. You expose which policies are put into place. So you are doing a similar job to the journalists, to journalists or true journalists. So yeah, as Denise says, what have you encountered? Because we've seen 3 prominent people, 2 on the radio, 1 on Sky News, have lost their jobs for challenging the narrative. So what have you gone through?
No, it's quite difficult. You're always, I mean, in one sense, you only get targeted if you're doing anything useful, I think. You know, if you're just there going about your business, nobody bothers with you. And in my case, and we see it with academics who are being targeted. We're certainly seeing the people in the media being targeted. Personalities are being targeted. You know, there's lots of high profile, don't necessarily like the term celebrities, but there are some of them who have that moniker, I suppose, who are being targeted, particularly on social media, and of course lawyers. And you know, it's this current well, not exactly the current government, because there's been so many prime ministers in such a short space of time, but it was a Conservative government of back who coined the phrase lefty lawyers, woke lawyers, activist lawyers. And that was simply because we were taking them. That's our job. We train, and we train for a very, very long time. It takes longer to become a lawyer than it does to become a doctor, you know, and our work is arduous and hard because we have primary legislation that's almost difficult to challenge, like we've got with the Rwanda Safety, Immigration and Asylum Act. It is now legislation, and the legislation has built into it that it can't be challenged. You know, talk about the separation of powers between the state, the executive and the judiciary. As you know, we had the Supreme Court ruling that Rwanda was unlawful, and then the government comes up and says, no, we're not having any of that. We'll just create a piece of law. I mean, an absolute shocking indictment. But we challenge that, and we challenge it effectively. And so they're going to do horrible things. So they're going to say horrible things. In my case, they produced a dossier. I mean, they called it a dossier. I mean, it was just nonsense. They just went through. I mean, they obviously hacked into my systems because they had cases that I'd done that weren't in the public domain. Some of them you would have just got. It was very a basic job that they did, because if you Google, you'll find a lot of my cases online. So they had some of that. But they did go back to the 80s of my membership with as a supporter of the New Deal movement, the revolutionary government in Grenada, and they had things about me with Caribbean-led solidarity. So they really went to look to see how they could paint me as a villain of the peace, as someone that needs to be closed down effectively. And you know what that did was to, for a short while, it really undermined a lot of people in this space. You know, people were frightened. Some of my younger colleagues were frightened. You know, I had one member of staff who was, you know, I think she was contemplating whether she wants to continue to do this work. And this is what this is meant to do. It's meant to shut down, challenge. Our job is to challenge. And we do a lot of public law stuff. And public law is about holding governments and the state to account, you know, for actions that are unlawful. And very often, and in fact, more often than not, these actions are proved to be unlawful. You know, we stop people being removed. I had a man who was sat on the tarmac, shackled by his feet and handcuffed, an Iraqi Kurdish man who suffered serious mental health issues, immigration detention doctor. And they don't normally come up as our friends often, because I always think that they're you know, they're usually on the side of the Home Office, I have to tell you. But this doctor actually wrote that this man is traumatized. He's got physical scars on his body that shows the signs of torture. Yet he was on the tarmac as one of the 6 men waiting to be flown out to Rwanda, June 14th, 2022, before that flight was stopped. You know, because we do things like this, they come for us. That particular attack on me was also an attack on the Labour Party, because they'd obviously drawn some sort of Venn diagram and thought, who could they find that's connected to Labour. I'm not an activist in Labour at all, but I was working on their white paper for a new piece of race legislation. So they wanted to have a go at Keir, and they thought, right, who could we find that's immigration, close to Labour? We had Bibi Stockholm in the news that week, small boats in the news that week. And then, of course, who can we find that's defended a Jamaican gangster who should have been deported but didn't get deported? And they found me. And what was really, really interesting is, in addition to the pernicious nature of the state trying to shut down effective opposition and control the dialogue, I suppose, and the narrative, was the racism. And that wasn't just because there was a pile on me on social media of people coming for me, you know, somebody outside my house, us having to do all sorts of security measures. So this was a very serious thing. But here's the nub. There are over 100 lawyers working on Rwanda, and I know all of them. Yeah, it sounds like a lot, but it's a small space. There are still only a small number of lawyers in the UK, and we're very well connected. Immigration lawyers, even more so, because we're networked, we're always under attack. There are 3 Asian lawyers in that group that I know of. There is 1 Black person in that group that I know of, and that's me.
Yeah, I know.
And it's me that they came for.
Imagine.
I guess I asked it. So you mentioned, we touched it briefly. How do you protect yourself then from these attacks? What do you have, like? Is it that classic case? Talk to your family and friends. They'll say nothing. They're going on there. What would you do to protect yourself?
Well, I have a strong network around me of family and friends, and yeah, it is difficult. I mean, for the first few days, it was really scary. Because I had death threats, I had all sorts of things. And in fact, the first time I left the house after it, I went to, I came out I won't mention the name of the tube stations, people don't know exactly what do that privately. But anyways, I came out of my local train station and 2 cars raced towards me. And I usually think I'm quite strong, but I actually had such a panic attack. It was the most scary thing, because I thought, like in the movies, you know, where someone's trying to take you out. It then turned out it was just 2 kids, boys, young men, teenagers. I don't even know if they were meant to be legally drunk. But anyway, they were racing each other. And I went up to them and they apologized for frightening me, because, you know, they obviously didn't know my story, but because they mounted the pavement and they said, "Are you okay?" And so I then started, there's about 5 different stations that I can use and walk from some and get a bus. And so I found myself each day just doing a different one. And my firm was brilliant. Lee Day were absolutely fabulous. They said, "Look, just take Ubers everywhere and we'll pay for it." I didn't do that because I thought I like walking, and I'm not going to change my life because there are some cowards out there. I think the cowards are small in number. They are organized, though. And what was interesting, we actually got a leak of some information as to who did the dossier. It was a chap called Jake Ryan, who was a special advisor to Suella Braverman. He was her senior special advisor. And we were sent some emails from this leak, which all has now stacked up. And we contacted him. And he wanted to know how we got his information. And then within 5 minutes of me ending my call with him, he did a subject access request of my firm to find out what information we had on him, which then told us that there was something a little bit more sinister here. So we sent all the emails to be checked out. And some of those emails, the origin was Israel.
What?
Yeah, and then countries in Eastern Europe. And what I think, because that's how they hack in, it's those Israeli intelligence services, which are the masters of hacking into people's systems. So I don't think that they were particularly interested in me. I think they were just asked to do a job.
Okay. So for me, a couple of things. I mean, you said so many interesting things. But first of all, even though disproportionate, if we look at disproportionality, we know that there may not be as many Black lawyers out there. Yeah, potentially. But for the whole Windrush case, 100 lawyers.
Rwanda. That was Rwanda.
Even for Rwanda.
Yeah.
For Rwanda.
Yeah. Mm.
3 Asian and 1 Black person being yourself.
Yeah.
How? Okay, then. So tell me, in terms of politics, where does politics play in that, do you think?
That's an interesting question. Well, it's not so much politics, it's more that there are some really good Black lawyers involved in immigration work. Black people have tended, I mean, when I first started out as a lawyer, I wanted to do, well, in fact, I didn't. I was started off as a criminal lawyer, and then I did some civil actions. And people said to me, don't do immigration, because all Black people do immigration and it's just not well paid and it's not very interesting. And I had that at the back of my mind, even though I wanted to do human rights work. And on my first day as a trainee in immigration, a woman came in, a Rwandan woman, actually, who had been airlifted from, the people who'd come over as refugees or asylum seekers, and had been airlifted by a charity. And she was the most amazing woman, really gorgeous, tall, beautiful skin. And she had this bit of clothing, which was lots and lots of fabric, a skirt.
Right.
And it may have been her national dress or something, but then she had a baby in her hand. And and the interpreter was speaking. And when they translated what she'd said, the translator was speaking, sorry. It is interpreter, isn't it? I always get the difference between the interpreter was speaking. And what had transpired in this woman's case was that she'd been raped in a refugee camp and by soldiers. And her skin, when she lifted up, the reason why I told about all that fabric, because she started rolling it up, and she had cigarette burns all over her legs where they tortured her. And what was even worse was, I mean, she was just smiling and graceful. And this was all authenticated because the Red Cross was involved and so on. But of course, you're not going to put those cigarette burns on yourself, are you? But what was awful is that the baby in her hand was a product of that rape and had HIV, and so was she. And at that point, and I just finished doing a master's degree in international relations with human rights. And I kept thinking, how can I use law with that knowledge of countries and what's going on around the world and so on? And I suddenly realized that's what immigration law is. It's not about getting people a visa or filling out forms. You really are. It's about life and death. It's really about, it's the base of humanity, people's right to live and people's right to live safely. And that was it. After that day, I thought, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing immigration. But not a lot of Black people do it, except for at a very low level, the high street level, where they're just filling out forms. And unfortunately, some of them not doing a really good job. But there are some great Black people in this space. They didn't get into Rwanda, but there was a lot of them doing Windrush and other really important pieces of work.
Good. Quincy.
And we spoke about humanitarianism. Why do you think that there's been such lack of empathy, and we are seeing human beings literally look at another human being and not understand their plight or the history of where they are today? Why do you think we are seeing such lack of empathy in today's society, in the world you're in?
So are you talking about migrants, the lack of empathy generally in the world?
Generally in the world when it comes to immigration, because we've seen immigration being used as a tool. And it was like what the current government did. It was like you are appealing to a section of society. Like that's going to solve the world. And as we know, it ain't. So why do you think that people have such lack of empathy towards human beings in the world of let's stick with immigration for the time being.
I think if you take the UK and Europe in particular, and even the United States, I think generally speaking, information is very scant, and people aren't as educated. These societies are not as developed and as educated as we like to think they are. So people don't really know much and take their information from bits of the media, with the popular sections of the media, which misinform them. So many, many years ago, I remember doing a course and found out that The Sun had the largest readership, because I think it sold 3 million a day, but then there's a multiplier, isn't it? How many people in the household might read the same paper? And it meant that it was more than that. It was about 20% of the population. That's where they got their information from. That that tells you quite a lot, really, how shocking that is. And of course, we see papers like the Mail and so on, which have big readerships, particularly the online versions. And we all end up reading it, don't we? Because, you know, we all click on something and not realize that's what it is. And the next minute you've read an entire Daily Mail article, even if you don't want to be. But we're quite fortunate because we can read those things and dissect them. But some people just haven't got time for that, and they just consume. So we've got, and what's worse, we've also had politicians do the same thing. We've had politicians demonize people. So the politicians won't say to you that so many people coming across in the boats, for instance, 25% of the people who came in the boats last year fled the Taliban. Now, you know, we're supposed to have a scheme for people coming from Afghanistan. It's called the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme. It's not worked well. And if people can't get here through a safe route, and I know that's become a bit of a cliche for this debate, safe routes, but it is true. There was a safe route for people from Ukraine. We'd had one previously for people from Syria. There isn't any other safe routes. And so people are going to have to flee. Lots of women come across in those boats from Afghanistan. Can you imagine a woman who can't work, who can't be educated, who could be beaten and stoned in the street, not wanting to flee from that anywhere in the world? But we have been taught that these people are our enemies. We've been taught to demonize them. We've been taught to believe that they are taking our resources and our jobs that people don't want to do. In fact, the legal migration to this country, the net migration figures of 700,000, is because there are so many people, and that's actually English people in the main, who either don't want to work, and I know some of them can't work through illnesses and so on, but we have a shortage. So we have actually recruited fruit pickers, vegetable pickers, people to work in abattoirs. I mean, there's no carers in this. This country's not. My mother has dementia, and I've hired an agency to supply us with carers, and we have about 4 different people who come from time to time, and 3 of them are here on a carer's visa from Ghana. And these are some of Ghana's best and brightest. They're all highly educated. They've all got a degree, and 2 of them were nurses in Ghana, but they still think coming here is better. The wages are better, the opportunities are better, and they get to travel and see another country. And so they come. So we are getting these countries' best people because our own people can't do that work or don't want to do it. And we are critical of them because we don't understand that. We don't understand how economies work. It is a lack of education, I think, in the main, and a lack of true and honest information, because what we get in the majority of the media, unfortunately, is not true or honest. That has caused people to think it's the other, it is the foreigner, that's the problem. I don't know if you've ever seen that cartoon of a particular hospital that shows, you know, they take out every single person who either wasn't born in the UK or has a parent that wasn't born in the UK, and they told them to have the day off, and there was one white cleaner left.
Jackie, this is a question that a conversation that's been going on. I was involved with a particular local authority where I was heading up a service for Ukrainians. Okay. And the question asked, and I saw what was happening. I saw how everything that people who came from Ukraine wanted, basically, they got it. Yeah, I mean, the boat was pushed out as you know, and so that's a current situation now. Then I look at Windrush, and people are saying, then they look at the post office. Is there a correlation, yes or no? Because what's happening, because the post office, a film was made, and then all of a sudden it's out there. But we've had programs made about Windrush, and the struggle is still there. I still know people, Jackie, who've never been on vacation. Yeah, big men and women who've never been on, their children go away. They've never left the country because they're scared to, because they haven't got the proper paperwork. There's still so many. Is there a correlation? Is it political? What is it? What's the correlation between what's happened with Windrush and what's happening with the post office? Why is it all happening for them and we're still struggling? The guy that we wanted to interview the other day, he got a very small amount. He was offered a very small amount of money. The case that you're handling, what's going on?
I mean, there's no doubt that racism is a factor in this. Wendy Williams did that really good report, the Windrush Lessons Learned review, and didn't find institutional racism because I was part of the independent advisory group of that, and she said that the assessment that she was doing, the assessment that you need to do to look whether there's institutional racism, as laid out in the Macpherson report after the murder of Stephen Lawrence, isn't what she was doing. So she wasn't able to find institutional racism, but she did find that thoughtlessness and that lack of trust, lack of flexibility, and she also found tenets of racism. And to me, you can't have tenets of racism if you got, it's like being a bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. If you've got tenets of racism, and then you're racist. So you've got racism. So so I think it was at the heart of the problems that people encountered from the hostile environment come right up to today. But I do think the lack of urgency to deal with it. I mean, remember, Theresa May was refusing to even give an apology until Jamaica's Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, who happened to be here with all the other Prime Ministers of the Caribbean. Just by coincidence, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting took place in the second week of April 2018, and he demanded an apology. And he's an interesting politician to have done that because his party is a conservative party, the Jamaica Labour Party. He's a conservative, and they're in alliance with the British Conservative Party. They're both members of the International Democratic Union, so which is a right-wing sort of conglomerate of conservative organisations and parties. So it was quite interesting. We didn't really expect him to do much. In fact, we thought he would, sort of do very little. But he made that big speech, and that's how we got the apology. But it was forced out of them. Yeah, mealy-mouthy set up the task force, and we now have the Windrush scheme, which deals with which deals with status, immigration status. And if there are people out there, they really ought to contact us because we can hold their hands and protect them. I can understand the mistrust, but they really ought to come forward. It's don't deny themselves the opportunity to travel and go back to their homelands and and live their full lives. But they do need to be careful how they do that. And then there's the Windrush compensation scheme, which is dealing with Windrush compensation. And we have seen many improvements over the years. I mean, it is 5 years this month that it's been going, the compensation scheme. The scandal, 6 years this month of being in the public domain, because many of us knew of the scandal many years before, and some people would argue it started in 1948 and even earlier, and people were denied the bits of paper that would have prevented the problem in the first place, and the destruction of the landing cards and so on. I think it's I think the lack of urgency, the lack of an inquiry. I mean, the post office victims are getting have a statutory inquiry. There's a statutory inquiry for COVID for Grenfell, not for Windrush. I'm just about to write to the Home Secretary again about that. I do believe they and the public too sees this as little old black people. I mean, whenever they show those photos of our ancestors with their little coats and their little grips and coming off that boat, I kind of shudder because it's an important photographic image and very iconic of the era, but it kind of also distorts the reality. And so, for instance, I have teachers, doctors, and I'm not saying that if you were a road sweeper or a porter in a hospital that you should be treated any differently, but the victims of the Windrush scandal cut across social structure. And that's not very evident from the way the narrative is built in the media. The media loves the down and out story, doesn't it? So this poor man who had to pull out his own teeth, all that sort of. Yeah. All black people are pretty hopeless. I mean, they love that. Or somebody was stuck in Jamaica and their own family couldn't look after them, so he was living in a hovel. Or the one that's now viral, going around, the video that's going around of a man in Jamaica who has all his family. So that's the thing that the media loves to do, but that's not the story at all. It's a microcosm of the story. It's part of it. So the media doesn't help. And the government sees that and they think, the other important thing, and I obviously don't want to keep talking because I know you've got lots of questions. The other important thing is that I think when the scandal first came into the public domain, the government looked around and said, these people have no representation, they have no leaders. It's the Black community. They'll make a lot of noise, they'll go and march, they'll bang some drums, and that will be it. You know, there won't be anybody doing anything serious. There won't be any scholarship. There won't be any lawyers coming forward because there's no money in it. There won't be anything. And to some extent, a little bit of that is true. I think they underestimated that there'd be a few of us who would just keep going at this. And before I joined Lead A, I was working pro bono on these cases. So that is unusual. And they didn't really kind of reckon that there'd be any person in the Black community who would do that. So, but I think they just think we are just a basket case, and so they can treat us any way they like, and they'll get away with it.
I know that your time is quite precious. You know, I mean, I was going to ask this last question, and this is why me and Denise say this all the time. Media, especially from a Black perspective, is so important, and I think that what we do is culturally, we all do individual things, and no one interlinks where we are seeing. Governments and newspapers and radio stations from the other side all interlinked. So from just lastly, the young gentleman who came back from Trinidad after all those years, I'm going to ask this question. Why do you think you want to come back to this country after the country disrespected him? Because I couldn't fathom that. I come back to a place. It's not, you might get compensation, but you're coming back to a place which has disrespected you all those years. Why do you think he came back?
I think it's symbolic. I don't think he'll stay. I think it's a symbolism of saying, this is my home, I want to touch down. He went to his mother's grave.
That's right, yeah.
Prevented from doing that. That was a hugely important moment for him to do, or thing for him to do. He's going around his old haunts around Notting Hill, Ladbroke Grove. His wife, who wasn't here because he's remarried, he keeps telling her, we were in a taxi together, and he was pointing out places that he'd worked at the Cumberland Hotel and so on. So I think he wants to retrace those steps. I think he also wants to set up the opportunities for his children and grandchildren who should be entitled. They're not here. They should be entitled to be here if they want to. There are some opportunities here. They're not great anymore, but there are some. And why shouldn't they have access? And I think that's his reason for being here. I would be surprised. I don't know, but I would be surprised if he would stay. Yeah. And we have seen, so Anthony Williams, my client who died in Jamaica 2 weeks ago of cancer, couldn't wait to get out when he got his money. It's such a shame that he didn't live long enough to enjoy it, but he did have. I mean, he said to me when he first went to Jamaica on a holiday, and he said, Jackie, I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what we're fighting for here. As soon as he had a few things to sort out, he said, as soon as I sort that out, I'm going back. Yeah. It's just a shame that he didn't live for long with that. But I think people's hearts are always torn. But I think Richard just wanted to do that symbolic thing.
Yeah. When I spoke to him, it did break my heart when I spoke to Richard, and he told me he'd been to see his mum's grave. And I just can't, I even spoke to Quincy, I couldn't get my head around it. Can you imagine not being able to see your mother for all that time? And then she passes away, and the only opportunity you've got is to come back and see her grave. I was nearly in tears myself just speaking to him. So, yeah. But Jackie, you know what? We've spoken several times before, but this particular interview, don't you think, Quincy, has been different? You've shared a lot more with us. Yes. You've shared a lot more and given us more insight, and most definitely, what's the message to people out there? What is the message can you share and tell people in the public? What's the message, Jackie?
Well, I think everything that's happening, you know, the whole thing around migrants, the stuff that's happening to Black people, particularly young Black people, the increase in racism, overt and subtle. As Black people move up in society, there are some intent on pushing them back down into their place. But we're also seeing the politicians fueling this, so that there's this very overt, ugly thing that you see on social media, you see on the streets, and that's politicians of various sorts.
Yeah.
And I think really we need to be vigilant. Black people need to be vigilant. All people need to be vigilant, because there are important allies in this space. Need to be vigilant, need to raise their heads above the parapet and speak and act. Because if everybody did a tiny little bit towards, you know, protecting humanity, it will make a big difference. If you just said one thing or did one thing or made one person, an asylum seeker or refugee, feel better, or found a way of giving some hours to a youth project or people referral unit and work with our young people who are so troubled. I don't think there's enough activism at any level in society at the moment. I think people are just cocooned into their own little spaces. And part of that is because things are hard. Things are hard at many levels for lots of families. People are hurting. There's not a lot of money or spare money around. And so people aren't feeling that they want to be out there helping anyone else when they need help for themselves. But we are a community, and I'm not just talking about Black people, you know, because there's lots of white people who are desperately hurting, possibly more so actually. You know, like white boys, for instance, are really struggling. White working class boys, I don't like the term, but you know, are really struggling in this society. We need to see ourselves as part of that society and not just part of our own little household, you know, and we need to do more. I think I was quite concerned when you said there are people out there who might be Windrush who haven't come forward. I'd quite like to know of them, meet them.
Some of them have tried. I've sent them, and they made appointments, and they've cancelled. There's one in particular, and he cancelled the appointment.
Okay.
Yeah, because
we have had capacity issues, because obviously the work is huge numbers, but we have actually increased capacity recently. We are a bigger team, so there may have been some glitches in the system where we weren't able to see somebody. But
not from your end, not from your end.
Oh, that person cancelled. It's very rare we would do that. Oh, right, okay, that makes sense.
Oh, not you, no.
Yeah, but there is a lot of good in the world. So this morning I also had a conversation with an English woman and her husband, white English people who've taken in a young African asylum seeker who was severely abused in her family, and then trafficked across several countries in Europe and spent some time in each of them. In fact, she speaks about 5 languages as a result of it, but horrendous backdrop to that ability to now have all these languages. The backstory is dreadful. And this family spoke to me this morning, and I must admit it made me feel quite tearful. They wanted to know if she was at risk of Rwanda. Okay. And the way they spoke about her made me feel that, you know, there was a lot of good and there was a lot of love, and we've just all got to keep looking for that and being part of it.
Yeah, well, on that note, may the ancestors rain down with protection over you.
Yes.
And may you continue doing the works, and may our relationship with the works and what we do continue. You've got a platform here to express, so it's not going to be cut off by a mainstream radio station or TV show. And yeah, just give thanks and hug your mum.
Thank you. Thank you. Downstairs with one of the carers. And can I thank you for the work you do and for allowing me so much space? Usually I get 2 minutes on mainstream, you don't really get a chance to say anything. And can I please apologize for starting a bit later than planned? I normally would never be so disrespectful. So much going on. Sorry.
Round of applause for you, Jackie. Really, really, really.
And your Twitter game is on point.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thank
All
you.
the best. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Jacqueline McKenzie, human rights lawyer, ladies and gentlemen. We just had a conversation. I think that the relationship